today I would like to introduce you to Professor Frank Robinson, and his talk is Capitalizing on COVID-19 Restrictions to Improve Linkages Between Students and the Real World of Animal Agriculture. Just a little bit of background. Dr. Robinson is a professor at the Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Sciences Department within the Faculty of Agriculture, Life and Environmental Sciences. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to present for this. My hope for what I have today, is that what I have to say will either inspire you to think or to ask questions about what are some of the good things that might have happened during this COVID-induced switch to online learning. So what I'm going to show you here is what the course description is in the calendar. So this is basically what students would see. And I want to draw your attention. It's actually the first production animal course for students in the BSc Agriculture and the BSc Animal Health programs. And it is really sort of the cornerstone entry course. And I want to draw your attention to the last sentence where it says students gain direct experience with animals in production and research environments. And before I go any further, I want to say that I have actually taught or co-taught this course 44 times prior to this particular term. So we have quite a few course objectives but I want to talk about two that we focus on for the labs. And one of them is to provide students with exposure to current Western Canadian animal agriculture practices. And the other one is to provide opportunities to work independently or in small groups to develop a fluency in agriculture. And so these are the two things that I kind of worried the most about with online learning, because typically we've taken students in groups of about 30 or 40 to 3 or 4 commercial farms. And the problem with that is we spend more time on buses than we spend at the farm, and also with cuts to our budget. These buses are expensive, it's a problem. And biosecurity can be an issue. But students have responded very positively to these, and some have involved pretty significant animal contact experiences. And for some students, it's the first time they get up close to an agricultural animal. And this slide pretty much speaks for itself. And this is, I'll never forget the day when I heard we were shutting down last year. So the Faculty of ALS last year conducted an in-depth survey with students at the end of the 2020 winter term and again at the end of the 2020 fall term. And we queried students about the transition to online learning and what some of the issues were for them. And my favorite question we asked them was, what advice or suggestions do you have for instructors in delivering courses online that would enhance your experience? And we had 247 students respond to this. And I just want to read through some of the things, because this is sort of what I had in my mind when I put this class together this year. So use synchronous lectures, record them, be considerate, accommodating, and flexible, manage student queries and have office hours, communicate with students and ask for feedback, put more focus on quizzes, assignments, and labs, not just the final exams. Some people actually like the asynchronous lectures, be organized, manage group work, and then be engaging and not boring. And then I want to skip down to the last one, which was really interesting. It said, ask students to turn their cameras on sometimes. So that's what I had in my mind when I had to, last fall, sort of think about what we would do in the labs in this course this winter. So I think of this slide basically as the hand of cards I was dealt. We had 142 students. We had 3 hours of simultaneous online lectures per week, which I wasn't really responsible for I think I did like 7 or something. And then we had 3 lab sessions of 3 hours each. So we had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday labs with about 44 to 50 students in each of those labs. And then to complicate all that, we had students in different time zones. So we had some in China, one in Colombia, some in BC, and some in Ontario. So this is a question that I thought about for a long time. And it's, what can you do in an online learning environment that would be better than what you did in person? So I subtitled this Capitalizing on COVID. And I've never thought this much about teaching a course in my life. And I started thinking about it last September. And I did most of the legwork in October and November last year. So we kind of were in pretty good shape in January. So I decided to run a variation of a theme that I'd done previously in a class called The Game of Farm Life, and we call this one The Game of Farm Life 2.0. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, but this project counted 35% of the term. So one of the things that students said about online learning in the survey was that they really wanted to see development of an online learning community. So I thought 45 to 50 students was too big. So I took each 3-hour lab and I split it into 2 1.5-hour labs. So we ended up having, instead of having 3 labs, we have 6 cohorts of an hour and a half each. And so I really wanted to make it easier for them to form a group where it was safe to talk and hopefully turn their cameras on. So within each of these lab groups then, I broke them down further into 3 or 4 groups of 3 or 4 students. So there was 36 groups in total for the class. And then I assigned each group of students a farm scenario. So I said, I'm going to give you a commodity, a number of animals, and a location. So I could say, you're going to be a turkey farmer in Redwater, and you're going to have 40,000 turkeys. Have a nice day. And then we asked them to develop a virtual farm operation. And so there's all kinds of room for creativity. But because some of these students didn't have a clue really where to start, some of them had never been on a farm, almost nobody had been on a turkey farm. So I assigned each group a farmer that worked in that commodity and said, these people will agree to talk to you once a week, so get organized, and they'll happily answer your questions. So because it was kind of open-ended, this time on the Game of Farm Life, I split it up over the 8 weeks of the project. I gave them a sort of a theme to look at every single week. So what aspect of the farm do you want to focus on? So the first week they talked about their farm. The next week they talked about the industry. The next week they talked about what you sell, how do you sell it. Then we talked about breeds. Then we talked about feeding. And then I had them describe 3 key technologies. Week 7 was the most fun because I sent them each of the 36 groups a special complicating factor, such as someone just phoned and said, all your yaks are walking down the main street of High River, or the power's out, or a snowstorm has buried your sheep. Anyway, so they were kind of fun, and I wrote them a personal letter, and they had to respond to that personal letter. Anyway, then in group on week 8, I had them describe what are the key factors that affect your production efficiency or profit. And I encouraged them to have fun with it. So then the next thing we added on top of that was a thing called a weekly class guest. So each of my 6 cohorts for the 8 weeks had a unique lab guest. So I had 48 lab guests, and these were farmers. And they had, so I picked them up out of people I knew, or I worked with some of the commodity groups to find them. And they had 15 to 45 minutes to talk about their farm as they wanted to. And I have to say that these guys took this very seriously, and they did a really good job. They either had PowerPoints or videos, and one guy actually flew a drone through his dairy barn to show us the layout. So this is just an example of the different kinds of commodities we had. We had beef, dairy, swine, equine, chicken, all 4 kinds of poultry. We had sheep, we had yaks, we had elk, we had bison, and we had meat goats. And so I had all these different commodities. And I have to tell you, I learned more about some of these commodities in this than I ever knew before. So we had these 48 farmers come in. And so some of them actually took a camera and their phone and walked around their farm and told us what was going on. This was February, and one lady was doing this on her farm. It was minus 38 below, and she was in her truck with a cup of Tim Hortons coffee talking about her farm. But she was so excited, and the students actually really bonded to her. We had a lot of diversity in my farmers. We had more than 50% were women. We had 5 or 6 Hutterite colonies. And about half of the farmers were former U of A alumni that I've taught in the last 35 years. So we were all on Zoom, and students, I hope they turned their cameras on. Some did, some didn't, but we always had them turn their cameras on at the end for a virtual round of applause, and it became kind of a fun thing. So I want to show you an example of what the students presented, because every week each of the 36 groups presented 3 PowerPoint slides to me for grading. And so all those weekly themes had to be addressed in 3 PowerPoint slides. So the grading was quite intensive. But this is the first weeks from one group, and they talked about, asked them to talk about their family, and I had every family kind of scenario you could think of. Some of them I'd never heard of before, but they were all had fun anyway. And this was a beef operation, and so they talked about what their property was like, where it was, and they made all this up, so they got to describe it. And we actually had them tell us what they produced in the end. So that was for the first week. So I got slides like this 8 times for 36 weeks. And then at the very end of the project, they could resubmit all 8 weeks project slides in one group. And I remarked that, and the marks could go up based on that. So that was all going on. And so this was a whole new thing for me. So I wanted to see how these students would perceive this 8-week-long project. So I set up a survey with the test scoring and questionnaire services group. And this survey went to them 9 times during the term. So it went every week before the project started and at the end of every one of the 8 weeks. And we just asked them to agree or disagree, strongly or not, to 5 different statements. And one of them was, I feel enthusiastic about the Game of Farm Life project this week. Another one was, I feel that I was part of a helpful online learning community in the lab session. And then the community formed my ANSI 101 lab is helping me stay engaged and motivated during the term, because that's what I was really quite worried about. And I feel like I'm getting sufficient guidance and help from the ANSI 101 teaching team, because I thought we were stretched pretty thin, to be honest. And I enjoy this ANSI 101 more than other online classes I'm taking this term. I didn't want to design a course they hated. I wanted to design a course that they would actually be at least as good as the other ones they're taking. So we sent the surveys out on the Wednesday afternoons after the last lab, and then they had 48 hours to respond to it. We also had a couple of open-ended questions, but I haven't got time here to go through the results of that. Our response rate was typically in the 70s, and for an incentive, we gave them 5 marks if they submitted 6 surveys or more. Those students who didn't want to participate had the option of writing a term paper worth the same marks. And I can tell you right now that not one student did that. So they all opted for the survey. So I'm going to go through the results now fairly quickly. But so for the first question, I feel enthusiastic about the Game of Farm Life this week. So the blue ones are strongly agree, the greens are agree. So the 2 of those together means it's a positive. The orange ones are neutral, the brown ones are disagree, and the red ones are strongly disagree. So I'm quite happy to say that throughout the whole 8-week project, and there was no change over time, students started out, 80% of the students were enthusiastic, and 80% were enthusiastic still at the end. So I think that met one of my big objectives. And then when we asked them, I feel that I was part of a helpful online learning community, its numbers were a little bit lower. And some of this, I think, had to do with some of the group dynamics. Like I said, we had different time zones, and some groups had experienced some difficulty forming a functional group. And it's only a couple of times I had to intervene. But we even have that happen when we have an in-person group project. So we asked them about if this class is really helping them stay engaged and motivated. The numbers were above 60% and typically above 70% that agreed or strongly agreed. And again, there was no change here over time. And I actually feel quite good the fact that we helped them quite a few of the students become motivated. In terms of getting sufficient guidance from us, I was worried that we wouldn't give them enough help. But I also didn't want to spoon feed them. I wanted to make this project be something that had their initiative would count. So, but we had over 80% of the students that said they were agreed or strongly agreed that they were getting sufficient help. And we had very few that said they weren't. And so I feel quite good about that. And the last one, I'm enjoying this course more than most of my other courses. We had typically between 70 and 80% of students saying that they enjoyed this course more than the others. And I would have been happy if this had been even 20%, because they're taking 5 courses and everybody's going to have a favorite course. So I feel like this was successful. But in none of these cases was there any significant change over the 8 weeks. And that could be a negative thing, saying, well, they didn't get more excited. But the other side of that is they didn't get less excited. So I felt that we maintained their enthusiasm and their interest and their just motivation to keep on going. So in summary then, while direct hands-on contact with animals wasn't possible, we did have some positives. And I thought the big thing was we had increased access to producers. So we had 48 producers instead of 3 to 4. And all 48 of these producer presentations are recorded on eClass. And so these students could actually, each student could see 48 student presentations if they wanted to, not just the ones that spoke to their lab group. We had access to a wider diversity of producers, like we've never gone to see a yak farmer, but we had them coming to our class. We had increased engagement between students and producers. The students actually, in some cases, came when actually broke COVID rules and went out to see these farmers on their farms. We had increased alumni engagements. You may think, well, that's really not a teaching objective, but you know what? It's a university objective. And I think I'm happy to see that we had that. We didn't spend any time on buses traveling to farms. We didn't spend any money on buses, and we had no biosecurity issues. So this has been an issue sometimes where some students from poultry farms can't go on other poultry farms. And students not residing in Edmonton were actually able to access the lab project. So I think the project change to online was positive, and the student survey data, I think, was quite positive. And as the instructional team, which is myself, 2 other faculty members, and 3 teaching assistants that helped coordinate the Zoom calls, or 4 teaching assistants that helped coordinate the Zoom calls, we really liked it. And we got, after every lab, we'd sort of hang on to the Zoom call and say what went well and what didn't go well. And we really liked it. I've had a lot of feedback from producers saying, well, I hope you invite me back again next year. And one person actually talked to me last week and said, I'm already working on my presentation for next year. And I kind of shuddered because I have a best before sticker on my forehead. And so I'm only going to be teaching 1 more year, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, this perceptions didn't change over the 8 weeks. And myself as project coordinator, I have a lot more confidence in online teaching now. And I thought about new ways to increase online student engagement in the future. So I've actually really enjoyed this. And as I said before this started, I think I had more fun teaching this way than I ever have in 35 years. And actually, I felt when those 8 weeks were over, I felt quite let down that I came to look forward to talking to those 6 farmers and 25 students each, so many times, and it was over just like that. So that's really all I have to say, but I'm happy to take questions if you have any.